about the church for a little while. As I said, we covered what is the church last week, and in that we had to understand a little bit about the purpose of the church at a real basic level. But it's not exhaustive. It'd be like us explaining, how a car works, and we say, it rolls down the road and it transports us. Yes, that's what a car does, but there's so much more to it. How does a car work when it's raining? Can you put anything else in the vehicle other than people, et cetera, things like that. Just like that example of the car being a vehicle for transportation, the church is a vehicle for the gospel, okay? Last week, if you remember, we ended with Acts 2:42, and we did that to answer the how and the why of what the church is. That verse says that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Should be able to recall from last week that the first four purposes that we found from that verse of what the church is supposed to be doing were teaching, fellowship, breaking bread, and prayer. Remember, though, we don't come to the church to get teaching. We don't come to the church to fellowship, to break bread, or to pray. If you weren't here last week, you're probably thinking, what's he talking about? Of course we come to the church to do these things, right? Once again, look at that verse. The first word is they. It's referring to people. Paul says they because he's talking about people. He's not talking about a building. So yes, we're here inside of a building that in the English language we call a church, but we gather together as the church. So the inverse of that would also be true, that whenever we have teaching, fellowship, eating, and praying, the church is on hand, right? Now these 4 points, the teaching needs to be a priority. If you have been here for any number of weeks or months now, you'll probably notice that I don't really get too excited or animated up here. My mindset's pretty simple with this. The content is far more important than the courier of the message, okay? That's the way of a teacher. And that's how I identify as I bring you a message on Sundays. I'm here to teach you. Everything that I say needs to be something that educates every one of us here. And it should be in a simple way that we can all understand it. Now you might be thinking, well, isn't that what every preacher does in a church? Not necessarily. Then they will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does. There is false teachings out there galore, isn't there? The cunning and craftiness of people and their deceitful scheming. We see that in many churches today. But the teaching in this church and in every other church should be speaking the truth in love. We should be able to come together as the church and hear the truth as found in the Bible, so that we, as a member of the local body of Christ, can grow to be an appropriate complement to him as the head. Teaching shouldn't just come from me either. Paul instructs the Romans in chapter 15. He says, I myself am convinced, my brothers and sisters, that you yourselves are full of goodness, filled with knowledge, and competent to instruct one another. Our learning ought to be coming from one another. Each of us here has a different perspective and different experiences while following Jesus that may very well be unique among others here. Everyone is charged to be teachers in the church. Here's a little secret you should know. I'm not the smartest person here, okay? I'm not even the most knowledgeable on biblical matters probably. I learn things just as much as you do from the others around me. Every one of us is called to teach others. Fellowshipping, getting together, whether in the form of a dinner, which we've talked about before, or for a service, or just for fun activities, we should come together. We don't have to just see each other on Sunday mornings for service. We should be welcome to the idea of having other opportunities to be with one another. Hebrews 10 says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." Why must we get together? So that we can support each other. That's what it says, so that we can encourage each other on. And if we're doing it, we might as well make it fun, right? Why wouldn't you? Have you ever been to a family gathering that was kind of lame? Of course we have. And the next year we don't want to go, right? But a fun family gathering, those are ones that we look forward to. And we do it so that we can accomplish what that verse says, so that we can spur each other on, so that we can use that iron sharpening iron to encourage each other. Have you ever noticed that the world is a hard place to live in? Absolutely. And spreading Jesus is hard sometimes? Yep. So we need to take a minute to get together with other fellow Christians and just allow each other to build ourselves up. Now, I might as well address something here that he talks about, that Paul talks about in that verse, and that's this. You don't have to attend church service on Sunday mornings to be a Christian, okay? You don't have to do it. But why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? You enjoy fellowship with others that have similar interests and hobbies, so why not fellowship with others that have the same faith in Jesus? And don't tell me because the people here are hypocrites. We all know that, all right? So you might as well just join the club. But you don't use that excuse for your buddy in bowling league or at the sportsman's club or any other thing that you're involved in, all right? You still go and hang out with them. And they're just as much hypocrites as anybody else. On the other hand, if you're so good that you don't need the fellowship or you don't need the teaching from others, then maybe you should come and in humility teach the rest of us, all right? Being alone is not an option. And I don't say that because I like being around a lot of people, okay? Because I don't. You can ask my family. I just like working by myself and being in the woods by myself. But God has called us to fellowship with believers. So that's what I'm going to do, and that's what we all need to do. I'm sure you've probably heard this little story before, but it's about a pastor and a fella. He was dealing with grief from loss of his wife, I believe it was, and the pastor went to visit him. He hadn't been in church for a while since his wife had passed away, and he realized the guy just wasn't in the mood to talk, so he sat with him. He had been sitting in front of the fireplace, and he had a small fire going. And the pastor stirs the fire, and with the tongs, he grabs out a little coal. Have you heard this story? And he just sets it on the hearth. They sat there in silence as the guy just didn't really want to talk, and slowly that coal snuffed itself out. After a long period of just sitting in the silence, the pastor returned that coal with the others, and within a few seconds, that reunited coal was glowing once again. The pastor let himself out the door, but the next Sunday, that grieving fellow was once again gathered together with the rest of the church family. The third thing is they broke bread. We talked about this real briefly last Sunday. They were eating, but they were also remembering communion, which we're going to do here this morning. I think we need to do a little more eating in order to fulfill this command, don't you? No complaints? Yeah. Why do we eat? Why do we like to get together and eat? Because we like to see people we love, right? We like to catch up with them. Maybe it's somebody we don't know as well, and we like to get to know them. And what was that quote? I don't remember who it was, a president or maybe, I think it was a president, where they said, you learn a lot about somebody by the way they eat their jelly beans. I think it was one of the presidents. Either way, we learn a lot about somebody as we share in a meal together. A meal brings us physical nourishment, but then communion brings us spiritual nourishment. Just as breaking bread refers to eating, it also references Jesus breaking the bread when he gave the first communion. We must continue to come together to remember what Jesus did through participating in communion. Just as communion draws us close to God, it also draws us closer to the ones that we're communing alongside. Just wait there, we're not doing communion right now, okay? The fourth thing there, prayer. The church met together to pray. Prayer often goes along with what we do on Sunday and Wednesday gatherings, but in all honesty, we should do more of it. Whether we realize it or not, we do get together and pray every time the prayer chain message goes out. Maybe we're not within arm's reach of each other, but we're doing it communally at the same time. In the early church, from when this passage in Acts was written, the followers were meeting to pray quite literally for direction. Not unlike us today. They were really needing direction, though, because Jesus had just ascended, and they needed to know what they were supposed to do next. What if we treated the situation that we were in just as dire as them, seeking God's direction as if he had just ascended a few days ago? These first four components are actions that are mainly accomplished internally. Obviously, we pray for others outside of the church, but the focus in that passage is that they were gathered together to pray. These last couple, though, are ones that focus outward. The fifth one is outreach. We know that the church was meant for outreach, right? Jesus tells us in those red words that he spoke post-resurrection in Matthew 28. It's probably a passage that I quote the most. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. We don't get to stay inside these walls. If a church is healthy, there should be activity outside. Where are you at, Dan? Just like bees, right? If the colony is healthy, there's going to be activity outside the hive. If not, there might not be a whole lot going on inside, right? This is where much of our church effort should be placed. If we want to see this church body grow, we must be involved in outreach, going and telling people about Jesus. I know you're probably tired of me always ending the closing prayer with it, but we must go out and be Jesus. We must always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks, to give a reason for the hope that we have. That's in 1 Peter 3:15. When we're out on the street being Jesus to people, they will ask us why we are the way we are. Some of us get that even if we're not talking about Jesus. They'll say, why are you happy? Why are you smiling? Why are you joyful? Maybe why are you even here? That's our opportunity to tell them about Jesus and what he's done for us. The stories from the Bible are great and we should share them, but explaining what Jesus has done for you in your own life is oftentimes more effective. I was looking at something the other day on Amazon. What do we always do when we look at a new product? You look at the review, right? We don't just look at the pictures and the description and click to buy it. We read the reviews. I want to know what Joe Schmo in Illinois has found to be true with this product, or somebody down in Florida. Does it fit the way that I need it to fit? Is it easy to use? Things like that aren't necessarily mentioned in the description. But if we're wise, we know that we should look at those mostly unbiased reviews. We want to see what that product, if that product lives up to what the manufacturer says that it will do. So we too must be prepared to give a review of what it's like to have Jesus in our life. Yes, we need to include the Bible, but people also want to hear your own words, how he has made a difference in your life. We need to share about that. Finally, the sixth thing, reading from James 1, Religion that is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. From Hebrews 13, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitalities to angels without knowing it. Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. Orphans, widows, strangers, prisoners, the mistreated, our time and money and energy must be spent ministering to the least of these. Here's how Jesus puts it. In Matthew 25, he says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." They will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick, or in prison, and did not help you?" He will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." If that doesn't put things into alignment for you, I don't know what will. If we aren't out there feeding, clothing, watering, and befriending the least of these, then Jesus doesn't want us with him. That's what he says in the passage, in the sentence just before this passage. He says, "Then he will say to those on the left, 'Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels.'" We've read this passage before. I've spoken on the sheep and the goats. Do you remember the importance here? The function of our church and individually affects our eternity. Let me put it another way. Our actions individually and as a church, they reveal what it is that we're following. If we're following Jesus, then we want to be with him, right? Here, he identifies to us that he is the least of these. If that's so, then it's paramount that a church engage in interactions with the least of these, if it is indeed a healthy church. Just as we looked at a little bit ago, this is the first Sunday, and as such, we're going to share in communion together. As the ushers serve us, as we listen to the music, I'd like us to contemplate that. Are we ourselves and the church as a whole fulfilling those 6 functions of a church? Would you consider that? Ushers?